Okay, let's see. Oh, center main bearing. Yeah. The center main bearing is just does not have a cage bearing. It has just needle bearings. There they are right there. And they love to trap water. And I always look at the bottom one. If there's been signs of any rust at all, I take off the bottom one and make sure that the surfaces on this part are in good shape. You can see a few places where it's been a little bit touched, but nothing that I would I'd say is no good. I'd just say it's been hit. Let me see if I can put this right here. All right, you look. Let's see if I can. There's a couple of places here where, yeah, you can see it right here. There's a line right there, and another one right there, but they're not even close to 50%, and they're not. I would change the bearings if I was rebuilding it, but you don't even have to do that. It's close enough. This surface here is again in real good shape, but again, you've got some signs of rust. You can see some places right there. You can see an outline of a but that's not a big issue because it's not over 50%. And these are matched. You put it together, you want to make sure, A, that you've got it together on the right side. In other words, the groove that holds it together. They're cracked.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I was just
they're cracked bearings, so they match together. You can't interchange halves or anything like that. It doesn't work. All right. And then secondly, it's got an oil hole right here which lubricates internally, and some of them have a pin. Yeah, that's a pinhole. It's my apologies. It's not an oil hole. It's a pinhole. There's the pin right there. It goes into that hole. So that's the way it holds. Now, again, there's a top and a bottom to this because of this arrangement right here. You can see it's a lot wider. I don't think it's that critical, but you can see this is the top where the puddled oil would get a chance to get down below. All right. Okay.
Now, the real early ones, like the 75 and 78, did they have this kind of...
No, this is a direct charge engine.
Okay.
This is it came out with this hole, I think, on the 850 and the 150, maybe the 140. I'm not sure. I haven't taken a 140 apart in years, so I really can't remember. But very definitely the 150 and the 85 shared this direct charge hole. If you can see here, these pockets right here.
Yeah.
You won't find those in the early 115s, and you won't find it in the 800s, but you do find it on the 850 and the 150, and you will see them also in the later 115s. They used the same pocket charge with a low crown piston, and they were a lot more durable. Of course, that's the market they were after at the time.
So
what these do is when your piston's going down, you're squeezing the gas air mixture,
yep.
And it's this hole allows the air current of fuel and air to start moving sooner. So when it gets down to the point where it's actually opened the ports, now we've got the full flow coming in, but this starts it. So as this is coming down, this is the first thing that opens. It hits this, and you can see it's sort of got a pointed edge.
Yeah.
That starts it. It opens it up real gradual so that the fuel flow and stuff is more complete.
So that's how they get the
extra horsepower.
Extra horsepower,
right.
And that's almost like a pre-charge.
It is a pre-charge.
It is pre-charge.
Exactly what it is. It's a pre-charge. Yeah,
well, that's interesting.
Good point.
I can see some performance gains with that setup.
But they were not a durable engine, and high hours. I tended, when I set these things, when I worked on them, I tended to retard the timing and anything I could do to make sure and put a lighter propeller on them so they turn up.
Mhm.
And that seemed to work. But if you were trying to get maximum speed out of it, well, then they weren't great. Okay, so we're on to the block. All right, so the first thing that I do, salt water again. You probably won't ever see this in fresh water, but in salt water, these blocks were made out of aluminum that had a fairly high content of copper to make them ductile and easy to mold and pour and all that stuff. And what happened is in 83, maybe 84, they started buying from crushed beer cans, reject beer cans from Milwaukee Beer and whatever, Budweiser, whoever. And that stuff has virtually close to no copper at all in it, because it has to sit on the shelf for 6 months and it's thin. And it'd be wouldn't be so cool if the beer ate right through its own container. So prior to that, these things, salt water would corrode, and it would corrode, especially if the engine was overheated, to the point where we're still on. Okay. If you see, this is the outline of the part of the gasket that presses against against the block. And if you lose enough material, which is right out here in the edge, it will no longer compress and it'll leak. It'll piss water onto the spark plugs. All right, so the reason this happens is when you've got salt water, you've got a medium which transfers electricity. There are mineral content fresh waters that are almost as bad. And you've got copper and you've got aluminum internally. And it corrodes internally, not externally necessarily. Maybe it starts externally, but you've got like two dissimilar metals, and you've got a electrolyte which has.
I think they call that galvanic destruction.
Okay, fine, whatever.
I think.
I'll buy that. Galvanic destruction sounds fine to me. But so that's the first thing you want to look for. Make sure there's no corrosion here if you're dealing with a salt water engine.
That's aircraft.
Okay.
Terminology.
Well, you guys were the first, for sure. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to look for. Second thing is, if this engine's had a piston that went bad, like we saw that bore, you'd want to look on the top here to make sure there was no cracks appearing from something really big getting caught between the piston and the back jug. Back of the jug itself, it's not really a jug. I guess you call it piston hole. All right, so the next thing is a lot of people are not aware of, and this goes whether it's fresh water or salt water. After about 20 years of use, the corrosion gets to your inner water jacket, and if it's especially if the engine's been the least bit overheated. And the recommendation on the water pump for these engines was replace it every year. It's a high pressure, low volume pump, and they work really hard. They get short vanes, and they really don't last very long. So these things, you want to make sure that you check. If you think it's been done, you want to make sure that you check each one of these ports. If you notice on this one, they've all got carbon on them, and that's a good sign. Like this carbon on the side. If it's been leaking, these will be water blasted.
Right.
But if this engine's 20 or 30 years old or older, I do these as a matter of course. Secondly, some guys say you can take this on a surface plate, plane it off, make sure this is good and clean, and you can reuse it. I have never had any luck whatsoever doing that. And I don't like having to rebuild an engine because I screwed up. I mean, you start them up and it's leaking. So I put a new one on. You can still get them from Mercury. They aren't cheap, but they're well worth it. You're going to put the time and effort into one of these blocks.
So what is your overall opinion of this engine? I mean, this block.
It's a very high output engine, which is great for a light fast boat. You know, if you're doing 60-plus miles an hour, the boat's capable of doing that with this engine on it. These are great. They put out a lot of horsepower for their size and weight. I think they still are probably right up there. I don't think there's anything that can really touch these things in that kind of an application. Some of the V6s, yeah.
So this block is something that you can reuse irregardless of some of the bits.
Oh, absolutely, yeah,
bits
yeah.
and
No,
pieces that we've seen.
you know, I'm a antique. This is antique stuff, anyhow. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it matches well with some boat that was made in the 70s or 80s, early 80s. A couple other things about this is kind of interesting. Let me see if I can turn this. Maybe you can. I'll turn it around. Hang on. All right. Okay. There is a plastic insert which goes into all of these holes, and it's a little tiny nozzle. That's a little plastic nozzle right here. Whoop, Jesus, I don't want to lose that. I got 5 more coming. No. If you look, you can see a little tiny hole in it.
Yeah, I think we can see that.
And they call these bleed restrictors, all right?
Yeah.
And Mercury would always say, well, how's your bleed restrictors if it wasn't idling well? And yeah, fine, I'd replace them. Wouldn't idle any better. The thing doesn't idle, and no matter what you do, and you do set your carburetors rich. You're very right about that. I mean, you're probably closer to 2 screws open rather than what the Mercury says is 1 or 1.5.
It's always to go fat.
Right. You got to go fat with these anyhow. But if it's still not idling well, pretty much the best bet is you've got bad labyrinth seals, and you need to replace the reed cage itself. And I hate doing reeds.
Yeah, that alignment thing is just yeah.
So when I
little to the left, little to the right.
I always look to make sure the labyrinth seals aren't bad. Another thing.
Now, was this little jet? Was this something that was for extra lubrication?
No. What happens is, let me see what I got up. Yeah. Okay. Your fuel. We're looking at the engine from the top down right now.
Okay.
The fuel puddles right here. Okay.
Oh,
the
okay.
fuel that condenses on these shields, and we're not talking about an Evinrude here or a Johnson. Mercury's overboard or loss was far, far less than Johnson and Evinrude's. I mean, they were really sloppy, especially before they started rebleeding. This right here is a one-way valve which pumps the residual fuel, which obviously is the greatest at the number 6 cylinder, and pumps it back up here to this and starts the whole cycle over again. So you're always reusing your oil.
That uses the